leaving the Prime Minister with a difficult decision to make on the timing of the election. I'm Patricia Karvelas, live from the lands of the Wurundjeri people in Melbourne. Welcome to Afternoon Briefing. Tropical Cyclone Alfred is forecast to cross the southeast Queensland coast overnight on Thursday and into Friday morning. The federal government will deliver 250,000 sandbags and provide defence support. Treasurer Jim Chalmers speaks to us from Brisbane to tell us how his community is coping. US President Donald Trump has delivered his first major address to Congress since returning to office, declaring America is back. Along the way, he evicted a Democratic congressman who heckled him from the chamber. I'll speak to US expert Bruce Wolpe for his analysis. And a 16-year-old boy from regional Western Australia has been charged after allegedly making violent online threats against a Sydney mosque. Police say the boy said he was going to Christchurch 2.0 this joint in an apparent reference to the 2019 mass shooting that claimed 51 lives. We're going to take you live now to the Queensland Premier, David Crisafulli, who is speaking on the Gold Coast about the cyclone.
The cyclone has continued to head towards the coast as the modelling has predicted, and a tropical cyclone will cross the coast somewhere in the late hours of Thursday into the early morning of Friday. It is really important that people in the area between Double Island Point all the way to the Gold Coast, which is the impact zone, prepares for that crossing and knows the risk that is there. I want to stress why it is so important to do the preparations now. There is the prospect that this cyclone could cross the coast in the middle of the night with a high tide, and that is not the time to be making your evacuation plan. Now is that time, and if you do so, I have every faith that Queenslanders will be kept safe. Storm tide flood mapping has now been released by those councils on the area, and I'm urging people to go and have a look at those websites. Again, disaster.qld.gov.au. There is also door knocking that's been undertaken. I want to thank the councils who have led that, but we've also put a number of resources to help them, including police and fire and emergency services recruits. What a wonderful opportunity for them to serve their community before they are even sworn into their profession. And we're really grateful for the work they're doing, as we are for the SES and all of our other volunteers. It's critical that people make themselves aware of those storm tide flood mapping, and if you are in that storm flood zone, make your emergency evacuation plan. Stay up to date with those mapping as Council continues to update it, and know the importance of the things that you can do now. Emergency alerts have been issued, and people on Moreton Island, on the Gold Coast, Redlands and in parts of Brisbane as well have received those just today. Great opportunity to know one other way of connecting with people, but it is vital that text messages won't be the only source. Go to those trusted websites, talk to your friends and family, and do those preparations. Large-scale door knocking operations are underway, and I want to thank the way that people have particularly assisted vulnerable Queenslanders, people, those in nursing homes, in aged care. We've pre-deployed health services into many of those areas, as well as power generation. We continue to work and offer those people who are sleeping rough the opportunity to also get out of harm's way, and we continue to move people out of those zones. Flood warning remains in place from the Mary River all the way to the border, and we will expect to have minor to major flooding in the days ahead. I've spoken a lot about the three phases. The first was that coastal erosion, which we saw over a large part of the Queensland coast. We are now moving into the second phase, and that is those damaging and destructive winds. They will come as that cyclone crosses the coast, and it is important that people make their preparations. Now, I want to address this. There is those people who are in those storm tide zones. You will make an informed decision based on the information that you've got. Our preference is for you to go and stay with friends and family. That is always the best option. If you have the means and you can go to a motel, if that's not an option, The evacuation centres are available as a last resort, of course. We want people to be safe, but our preference is always to be with friends and family. For those who are in areas where you know there's river flooding, do your normal procedures. Make sure that you're well aware of your evacuation plan in the same way that you normally do for those heavy rainfall events. To the other residents, the vast majority of Queenslanders in this area, this large populated area in the southeast, the safest place for you is at home and with your family. And if you do the precautions now, your home is the safest place. Take the opportunity to clear your yard of loose items. Take the opportunity to remove any trees that might be hanging over your roof. Get your valuables into one location. Have bottled water and tinned food. Those windows are closing to do that, and it's really important that you do. And if you do, I have every confidence that you will be safe and you will be kept in one piece. I have every confidence of that. We then move into the third phase, which is that flooding rain, and the Bureau has continued to update modelling to show that there is the very likely prospect of heavy rainfall in the days ahead. Those evacuation centres, I want to thank the local governments for the way they have mobilised them, including here on the coast, Acting Mayor. I know at Runaway Bay the centre has already opened, and you've got another two, I think at Burleigh and Nerang, that you're ready to open by 5 o'clock today. But councils are doing that across the board. Again, they are there as a last resort, but they are there, and we need you to be aware of that. If you want further information, there is that Get Ready website if you want to know those little tips around the house. But right now, that disaster.qld, that's really where we want people to go to, because you will continue to get those up to date, including the modelling as it comes to hand. I've just been informed that the Gold Coast Airport will be closing in about an hour's time at 4 o'clock today. No doubt the Brisbane Airport will continue to liaise with its airlines, and that is a decision for them. And we're urging those passengers to take the advice directly from your airline. We have pre-deployed vessels on the Broadwater, and we've done that to make sure that if there is the situation of the need for things like swift water rescue, that we have the capacity there. But the best time to leave your home is not in the middle of the night on a high tide with a cyclone crossing the coast. If you are in a vulnerable area and you've got the opportunity to go and stay with friends and family, it's a decision you should take. Door knocking will continue. Just an update on health and schools. Queensland Health have continued to operate today as we said they would, and schools were operational today as we said they would. From tomorrow, Thursday and Friday, those elective procedures won't take place, but our emergency departments are available. And I want to thank the staff who come in and serve others at a difficult time, and that's why we're so grateful for people who work in the health system. Likewise with the schools, we thank the way that the schools have worked with us. There will be no school on tomorrow or Friday, and we'll update people into the future. Public transport, buses and trains will cease operating from the last service today, and they won't be open on they won't be operational on Thursday and Friday as well. And I mentioned earlier that red alert, a maritime red alert has been issued, which means no vessels are permitted from now without the express approval of the Harbour Master. Today I can announce that disaster activation has been triggered for those councils in this area, and I'm really, really glad that the Federal Minister has joined me, and she'll unpack what that means in a second. But the reason why this is important, I want Queenslanders to know that there will be no daylight between the response and the recovery. And the best way that you can guarantee a good recovery is to do the little things now to keep yourself out of harm's way, and that speeds up the recovery process. But we are already mobilising the councils to be able to go in and respond. I mentioned earlier today we've got 1,000 Energex crew. They are ready to serve, and we have contractors ready to help clean the debris. It is essential that we get power connected as quickly as we can after an event like this. The safest place for you during the event is at home, and when a cyclone crosses, very often power is the first thing that goes out, and there is the prospect of live lines, and people have to be really cautious with that. Right now, you need to know that those crews are ready to serve, and again, we thank them. Community recovery teams are prepared, they're ready to support people, hubs will be established. I do this because I want Queenslanders to know how seriously we're taking this, how much focus we're putting on this, and how keen we are to allow this proud state to be able to get back up after the event. But right now, everyone's got to play their role. We've spent a lot of time and we've had a lot of focus across all levels of government, a number of agencies, getting ready for this. And we've said every day how seriously we're taking this, and we want you to do the same. And I know that there's a large element of the population who have done that work already. Please, if you believe that your neighbour hasn't, it's just a great opportunity just to reach out and say g'day, because there will be an element of the population who may not have heard about it or may not quite be grasping the magnitude of this. It is a serious event. If you do the little things, you will get through it. I have every faith in Queenslanders to handle these events. Every faith. History has shown that. There's not many states that are as disaster resilient as this one anywhere on the planet. Just asking to make sure people do the little things now. Finally, this is a very rare event. It's an extremely rare event. It's been half a century since a system of this size crossed this far south. But they do happen, and you can get through them if you do the preparation now. And really grateful for the work of everyone in the way they've come together, including federal government. And I'm grateful for your time, Minister.
Well, thank you very much, Premier, and thanks everybody for coming. As the Premier's indicated, it's now clear that this cyclone is heading west, it's heading towards the coast, and we can expect it to cross the coast. And as the Premier has said, this is not unprecedented, but it is unusual. We know that the Queensland Government is well positioned to lead on this response. We're also working with the New South Wales Government, and Premier Crisafulli and Premier Minns are regularly in contact with our government. You will have seen that the Prime Minister was here earlier today. They lead, but we want to be good partners. Good partners to our state governments through an event of this kind, good partners to Queenslanders, good partners to the people of northern New South Wales. And so today we've taken a series of steps to support communities. We've been able to provide significant volumes of sandbags through Defence and through the National Emergency Management Agency. We're pre-positioning heavy lift helicopters so that they are in place in this region, ready to be deployed if they are required. We, of course, are engaging closely through the National Situation Room with both governments to make sure that we have the best possible analysis and information about what is to come, and we're supporting crisis planning and readiness. And today we convened a large meeting with the private sector of all of those entities who play a role through a crisis and into a recovery, making sure that entities in transport, logistics, telecommunications, energy are briefed, do understand what's coming, and are able to share with the Australian Government the readiness steps that they are taking to make sure that their services are going to be able to continue through this event. We are activating today disaster assistance to support councils. There's a power of work going on out there. It's going on through the emergency management workers, through police, through essential service workers, and also, of course, through councils. And right across this state and into northern New South Wales, council officers are playing a really important role in preparing communities for the event that is to come. Disaster assistance is really significant. Providing councils the assurance that they will receive financial support for the counter-disaster operations that they undertake as they ready their communities for this event. We also want councils to be confident that as they move quickly to repair essential public infrastructure, they will receive financial support for those repairs. And so the announcement today, a joint announcement between the Albanese Government and the Crisafulli Government, switches on that support for a series of councils, and I'll step through them. It is for the local government areas of Brisbane, Fraser Coast, Gold Coast, Gympie, Ipswich, Logan, Moreton Bay, Noosa, Redland, Scenic Rim, Somerset and Sunshine Coast. And I want to say this, We are moving quickly to do this. I'm really grateful to Minister Ley, with whom I work very closely and very regularly. Unfortunately, we've had many occasions to speak with one another over this high-risk weather season, but it is a pleasure to work with her and her team. We've worked closely to put these arrangements in place quickly so that councils can have confidence in taking the steps that they require. It is a precursor of what's to come. We're determined to work hand in glove with the government here to make sure that Queenslanders have the support that they require. That's true in northern New South Wales as well. As the Premier said, it matters how quickly and smoothly we are able to move into recovery. Right now, the focus is on protecting life. But there will come a time in the very near future when we have to turn our minds to recovery, and we want to make sure we're ready. My final message is to all the people out there who are taking all of the steps that are necessary to look after themselves, their families and their neighbourhoods. I know that people are going out there getting the information they need about the risk they're exposed to. I know people are working to prepare their homes, to prepare an evacuation plan or to ready themselves for the weather that is to come. And I know that people are heeding the warnings that are provided to them by emergency services. To all of you, I say thank you. We can get through this together, and you should understand that all levels of government, local government, state government, federal government, are working together in the community interest and to keep people safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Minister McAllister. Thank you. Over to you guys.
So what does the disaster kind of funds look like for councils? Is it grants? How does it work?
It enables councils to get in and do the work rather than squabbling over those loose change. And it's a process we've put in place, having seen in years gone by a more cumbersome approach, and it's on the back of having a good relationship and a trusting relationship with local government, so it enables them to get in, do the work, and then they can claim that back. And rather than go through that process, they know that that money's there. And in many cases, it's the difference between a road being repaired immediately or not. And so I want residents to know that we do that because we understand psychologically how important recovery is. And it's also important before an event to know that it's not going to be a process where you're left on your own. Right now, there's a whole heap of people in North and Far North Queensland who've just been through a really big flooding event. We've got people on the ground there right now, working with those councils. And we've got people impacted from one end of the state to the other. And every Queenslander matters, and every Queenslander is going to be serviced. And right now, there's a big challenge in the southeast of the state, the likes of which we haven't seen for a long, long time. But I've got every faith in those Queenslanders, and I've got every faith in the processes we're putting in place. And all we're asking is for residents to do that little bit of work now in the remaining window, and we'll get through it.
We're hearing from employees, they're getting mixed messages from their employers as
Yeah.
to whether they should go into the office or not. What's your advice there?
Well, throughout this, we've given the information and we've allowed people to make an informed decision. So I can tell you what we've done. Today, we said that it was fine for people to go to school and go for their regular health appointments, and public servants went to work. From tomorrow, we've put in place a system that people don't have to go into school and into the health system or into the office. That's what we're doing. We've given the advice to people, and I have every faith that people will make the right decision.
We've got a large number of police arriving today. What will be happening with them?
Westo, it's important that we have that sign of how seriously we're taking it, and in many cases those police will be going door to door. They will also be there to make sure that the logistics that are needed are on the ground. And by the Commissioner, the Acting Commissioner, putting in place that declaration, that gives them a level of authority that they're able to truly lean in and help get results. And I make the point to all Queenslanders, if someone turns up at your door and is giving you the information, they're not there because it's something as an afterthought. They're there because it's important and you're important. And increasingly, I do believe that when events like this happen, that people realise truly what's important in life. You are what's important in life, and of course you should do all of the preparation to protect your property. Of course you should. That is the most important thing. But humans are worth more than any other material possession.
Which areas are they going up in? Do
right across the board. All of those local government areas have mapped those storm surge, and they are going door to door. Now, I say to people, getting a knock on the door is just one thing you should be absorbing. You could get a text message. You'll also have those maps that are on disaster.qld.gov.au, and you can have a look and make an informed decision. Now, if you aren't in one of those zones, either a flood or a storm surge, best place for you is at home, and you've got to prepare your house. And by tomorrow afternoon, preparing your house will be very difficult. That window is now, so get in and do the little things.
Can I ask you about voters, because you've got a lot in your electorate? What's the best advice if you live on a vote?
Well, we've had state government officers actually go and speak to those people on vessels, including some who are in vessels that aren't of the most seaworthy nature, which you and I have spoken about over the years, and we've advised them that there is a safer place for them than being on their vessel, and that message will continue to be delivered. Now, again, we give people the information and they make an informed choice, and the information we're giving people at the moment is being on a boat is not where you should be. And I come back to everything that we've done from the start of the week. We give the information in a clear and concise way, and that gives people the ability to make an informed choice. And as the system moves closer, and to be clear, there hasn't been a model for the last few days that hasn't said that this will cross the coast and hasn't said that it will be a cyclone when it does. So it's happening. Exactly where will continue to tighten, exactly how strong and exactly when, they're the variables. But that window is closing. But the one thing that is not negotiable, the one thing that's been consistent for a long time, is that it is going to cross. So we'll provide the information, and it will be on a greater frequency as the event gets closer. When we know something, you'll know it. And we just ask people to make the right choices, and I've got every faith they will. All right, guys. Thanks very much.
Can I thank you,
Oh, please.
first?
Yeah, thanks.
Sorry, just before we close off today, I wanted to, on behalf of the City, express our very sincere thanks to the Premier and the Queensland Government and to Minister McAllister and the Commonwealth, because we are receiving unprecedented support here in the City of Gold Coast. It is likely to be the most affected area of the local governments along the coastline, and we greatly value the support that we've received to date. It's really been fantastic. So thank you, Premier. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much, Acting Mayor. Thanks very much. Thanks.
And that was the Queensland Premier, David Crisafulli, and Emergency Management Minister Jenny McAllister, speaking there on the Gold Coast about Tropical Cyclone Alfred. Just a couple of things we've learned. Disaster activation has been triggered for councils in the area expected to be affected. The Premier also said it was important to prepare now due to the prospect this cyclone could cross the coast in the middle of the night with a high tide. The Premier says the Gold Coast Airport is about to be closed at 4 p.m. local time, so that is imminent. In about half an hour's time, Gold Coast Airport will close. The Premier says the state has entered the second phase of the weather event now, which is damaging and destructive winds. Now, the Prime Minister was in Queensland this morning, also with the Queensland Premier. This is actually the second time the Queensland Premier has spoken today with his federal counterpart, the Emergency Services Minister, but with the Prime Minister this morning. He says Australia's Defence Force is ready to assist after the Category 2 cyclone makes landfall. Anthony Albanese says the nation stands ready to respond across both southeast Queensland and the northern New South Wales coast.
Prepare, take this seriously. This is a rare event. The governments across the board are taking this seriously, and Queenslanders, as well as those on the north coast of New South Wales, need to do so as well. The Commonwealth wants to reiterate something that I know the Premiers have spoken directly this morning as well. There's no Tweed border here. This is not recognised by the cyclone. and it certainly shouldn't be recognised by government's responses.
Treasurer Jim Chalmers' electorate of Logan in Queensland is in the path of the cyclone. I spoke to him a little earlier. Treasurer, welcome to Afternoon Briefing.
Thanks very much, Patricia.
As a Treasurer who lives in Brisbane, just give me a sense of the anxiety across the city and region right now.
I think people are really worried. I think people are scared about what the next few days might bring. Certainly there's a lot of information out there which suggests that it's going to be a very difficult few days, if not difficult few weeks. We've got this cyclone sitting just offshore now, expected to cross over late Thursday or early Friday, and obviously that will bring with it a heap of rain, a heap of winds, and so people are bracing for the worst, preparing for the worst, but hoping for the best.
And Treasurer, people are really worried about their insurance companies and how they will deal with whatever damage is done to their properties. We know they're already worried about this. They're raising it when they're speaking to reporters already. When the RBA cut rates, you called the big banks. Are you going to be calling the insurance companies to put them on notice ahead of this?
Yeah, I will be speaking with the insurance companies, and that's to remind them, really, not that they might need reminding of the really stressful time that people are going through. And what's unusual about this cyclone, or the likely path of this cyclone, is that our friends to the north and far north Queensland, where these events are more regular, these are population centres that get hit, but it's very rare to see a cyclone this far south and likely to hit a population centre this big as southeast Queensland and the northern part of New South Wales. And so obviously the insurance companies have got a big role to play here. We want to make sure that they're doing the right thing by their customers, recognising that it's going to be a really stressful time for everyone, and we want to make sure that the way that people deal with insurance companies doesn't add unnecessarily to that stress.
The National Emergency Management Agency is going to be convening today. The Prime Minister confirming that earlier when he spoke, bringing together a lot of these key agencies, obviously insurance being one of them, supermarkets, banking companies, telcos. What do they need to do to ensure people are not left vulnerable?
Well, first of all, prepare well. I was part of some discussions yesterday with the Premier here in Queensland, Jenny McAllister, who's our Emergencies Minister, making sure that everything that can be done in relation to telcos and supermarkets is being done, making sure that we can get the shelves restocked, for example, making sure that the emergency equipment for the telcos is in place. I've had exchanges with some of the major bank CEOs to make sure that their infrastructure is resilient enough to deal with what we expect over the coming days. And so preparation is key, and there's been a lot of preparation. We don't often get this much warning in southeast Queensland for these sorts of weather events, and so a lot of preparation, but also making sure that all of the businesses in these really important sectors, they've got responsibilities to people. I'm confident that they'll discharge those responsibilities the best way that they can, and having a few days' notice has been helpful in that regard.
As you know, scientists say the range of tropical cyclones is increasing due to climate change and warming sea surface temperatures, and that in fact even Sydney could be hit in a sort of future scenario. Are we really prepared for those kinds of scenarios, Treasurer, given the population centre point you were making, that clearly we do have cyclones in this country, but they haven't sort of hit the population centres that we're seeing now?
I mean, clearly I think it's self-evident, scientifically self-evident, that these sorts of natural disasters are becoming more frequent and that the pattern and the path of them is changing. I think that's self-evident. I don't think that's a political point to make. And that's why we're very focused in the medium and longer term on dealing with climate change, but also in the nearer term, making sure that we find room in our budget for mitigation when it comes to flooding, for example, and in other ways. We have been redirecting spending in that direction to try and make sure that we are better prepared. But these natural disasters are becoming more frequent, more devastating, as you rightly point out in your question. The population centres like Brisbane, Sunshine Coast, Gold Coast, Logan, into the northern part of New South Wales are increasingly vulnerable, and that puts the responsibility, I think, on governments at all levels to do what we can, to do more, to prepare for the worst.
Now, of course, there is a budget in March. I'm going to get to the national accounts for today in a moment, but you mentioned the budget there in terms of mitigation. We haven't had the cyclone hit yet, but no doubt it'll have an impact on your budget, won't it, Treasurer, and perhaps a significant impact?
Of course it will. You know, our focus is on the human cost of these natural disasters. Our focus is on helping people prepare in neighbourhoods and communities right throughout this region and further south. But of course, when the time comes, there'll be a substantial economic cost and there'll be a substantial cost to the budget as well. And I say to everyone who's worried about the path of this cyclone, we know that Australians are there for each other in difficult times like these, and the government will be there for you as well. We're prepared to do whatever it takes to help people prepare, to help people respond, and then, of course, to rebuild as well. Now, that will come with a cost, but that's not our primary focus. Our exclusive focus right now is on the human element of this. A lot of people who are very worried, making sure that we're doing everything we can to help people prepare.
Now let's get to today's national accounts. Australia is now out of a per capita recession. You've been worried about the economy for some time. You've expressed it with me many times. Is this evidence that the economy has turned the corner?
This is evidence the economy's turned a corner. I think that's the overwhelming sense that we get from today's national accounts. What we see here is a very solid, very encouraging rebound in growth. And just as encouraging is the fact that our growth in our economy is now not as reliant as it was before on public spending. We're seeing the private sector take its rightful place as the key driver of growth in our economy. That is particularly pleasing from our point of view. And so if you look at these numbers today, you see that growth is accelerating. Momentum is gathering pace in our economy. That's a very good thing. Now, we don't get carried away because we know there's a lot of global economic uncertainty. There's a lot of uncertainty just off the Queensland coast, as we've been talking about. We know that people are still under pressure, but we're very encouraged by these national accounts because they do show the economy's turned a corner in very welcome and encouraging ways, and the private sector in particular picking up is especially welcome.
Okay, so if we accept that the Australian economy is turning a corner, the Trump administration's move to unveil a suite of tariffs on allies and others does risk derailing this, doesn't it? In a response to the new tariff regime, affected countries have imposed a wave of retaliatory measures. What will that do to suppress growth? What are you worried about?
Well, there is a lot of global economic uncertainty, and that's part of it, but it's not all of it. You know, the Chinese economy is slowing. We've got a war in Eastern Europe. We've got a tentative ceasefire in the Middle East, political uncertainty around the world, economic uncertainty as well, and we're not immune from that. And that's why, obviously, we monitor very closely the announcements being made about new policy directions from a new administration in the US. And to be blunt about it, you know, we've got a lot at stake as Australians, as a very trade-exposed economy, when it comes to these escalating trade tensions around the world. But the encouraging thing about the numbers that we're seeing in our economy is that we are building together as Australians a much firmer foundation to deal with this uncertainty, whether it be cyclones, whether it be global economic uncertainty, whether it be political uncertainty around the world. We're building a better foundation together to deal with that, because we do have a lot at stake, but we've got a lot going for us as well, and we see that in today's national accounts.
And we have seen China retaliate already to the tariffs being imposed on them, the higher tariffs. How big will the collateral damage to the Australian economy be, given we are so exposed to anything that happens with China?
Yeah, this is our major concern, really, the escalation of these trade tensions. You know, when we asked the Treasury to model before the election the potential impacts of these sorts of scenarios, there were two sets of impacts: the direct impacts on our industries, but also the broader consequences of escalating trade tensions. And again, you know, we're not immune from that. We're already, in one way or another, impacted by the substantial slowing in the Chinese economy. And what we're seeing around the world risks slower global growth. It risks higher global inflation. And that's why it's of concern to us. It's why we monitor it so closely. And it's also why it's so important this foundation that we're building together is becoming more robust. If you take a step back and think about how the position we're in to confront this uncertainty, we've got inflation down, we've got incomes and wages up, we've got unemployment low, we've got the Liberal debt down, interest rates have started to come down, and now the economy's growing solidly as well. And all of those things are very important as we confront this international uncertainty together.
And of course, you did go to Washington to try and lobby for exemptions to our own potential tariffs. I've heard lots of different Labor senior people speak about this, really try to pour cold water on whether we would get an exemption. Am I reading that right? Is there a sort of sense that you think this is going to be pretty hard?
I mean, it remains to be seen. You know, we've got a good case to make, and we've been making that case at a number of different levels, including, in my case, directly to my counterpart, Secretary Bessent and Director Hassett, and to some of the Wall Street leaders who are close to the administration. And so we've taken every opportunity we can to make our case. I think Minister Wong put it best when she said it will be harder this time than last time to get this exemption, but that doesn't mean we take either outcome for granted. We don't think it's determined yet. We know it will be overwhelmingly a decision for President Trump to take, and so we are engaging at every level we can to make Australia's case. Australia is different to these other countries that have been the focus of the Trump administration. Americans run a trade surplus with us. They get tariff-free access to our markets. We're making a contribution on defence. We've got a lot of the critical minerals they need.
Let me pick you up on the defence line.
Hundreds of billions of dollars of investment into the American economy, and all that's important.
Let me put this to you, because you mentioned money in defence. Trump's pick for a top Pentagon post, Elbridge Colby, has said he wants Australia to massively increase its defence expenditure to counter China, arguing that basically we're not spending enough, knowing the figures of what we spend and saying it's not enough. Will we consider this request? We've seen, for instance, in the UK, a further increase there in terms of defence spending, a decrease there also on aid spending. Will we go further than the 2.4%?
Well, I think that number you reference reflects the very substantial increase in defence spending which is already underway, you know, from 2% closer to the figure that you reference, you know, tens of billions of dollars in extra investment in defence. It's one of the big pressures on our budget, and it shows that we are prepared to invest in our capacity and our ability to work with our allies. And so the extra investment that we've been able to make in defence, as a tribute to the Deputy Prime Minister and the Cabinet for finding room in our budget to do that.
But the Trump administration still doesn't think it's enough.
Part of,
they're still saying it's not enough.
Yeah. Yeah, this is part of the positive story that we tell our colleagues. It was certainly part of my pitch when I met with Secretary Bessent, Director Hassett in DC, that we are increasing our defence spending, and it comes with a whole bunch of other ways that this economic relationship is a relationship of mutual economic benefit. It's full of opportunities. We've got a good case to make, and we've been making it.
Just finally, Teal Independents, led by Allegra Spender, called to index tax brackets to inflation. Are you prepared to look at it?
Well, it's not the first time they've called for that. They've asked me questions in the Parliament about that before. I understand and respect their position. And I know that this has been a proposal that's been bouncing around for a while. The difference between the approach that the Teals can take and the approach that I have to take is I have to make it all add up. It's easy to make proposals about changes which would cost the budget substantially. We've actually found a very important way to return bracket creep. We did that with the tax cuts which started rolling out on the 1st of July. I'm very proud of that because we found the best way to return bracket creep in a way that supports labour force participation and brings all kinds of benefits by providing a tax cut to to every Australian taxpayer. And if you look at today's national accounts, you can see the positive role that those tax cuts are playing. And so I respect and understand their position. I engage with them regularly on it, and that's a good thing,
But no
that
movement.
they are making proposals like this, but I have to make everything add up.
Okay, just finally, Treasurer, does this cyclone mean that you will ultimately be delivering your budget in March?
Oh, well, obviously, we've been working towards a budget towards the end of March for some time now. We've been meeting the Expenditure Review Committee, putting the budget together, and we've obviously understand and acknowledge that it's up to the Prime Minister in consultation with us as his senior colleagues to work out when he calls the election. But we've certainly been preparing for that budget at the end of March. I think I've said that countless times publicly, that's what we have been working towards. I'll leave the kind of political commentary about election timing and the like to others. Our focus is on dealing with this cyclone, preparing for it and then responding to it. Our focus is on developments in the economy and around the world. And I'll leave the election timing commentary to others.
Okay, Treasurer, always great to speak to you. Thank you.
And you, Patricia. Thank you.
Well, let's bring in my political panel to talk about broader issues. Liberal MP for Flinders, Zoe McKenzie, and Josh Wilson, Assistant Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Welcome to both of you. Now, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has said Australia is open to consideration of its involvement in any peacekeeping process in Ukraine. Josh, to you first. Should we contribute? Should we seriously think about this, given we have provided so much support to Ukraine?
Hi, Patricia, and hi, Zoe. Look, I think what the Prime Minister has said is that we stand with Ukraine. We've supported Ukraine in their response to the illegal and immoral invasion by Russia. We've provided now $1.5 billion worth of support, both in terms of defence and humanitarian assistance. And I think the Prime Minister has said that we will continue to support Ukraine and continue to be prepared to consider what kind of support that might include.
Okay, and do you think that we should lean in, given we have been a partner for so long?
Well, I certainly think we should continue to support Ukraine. It's the right thing to do. It's in keeping with our values and our character, and it's in our broader national interest, of course, global interest, because we are like many countries that benefit from observance of the rule of law, and what's happened there is an illegal and immoral invasion of another sovereign country. How we support Ukraine in future, of course, will be principally determined by circumstances. I mean, at the moment, they're at war. There isn't a peace or a ceasefire on which a sort of peacekeeping or other kind of involvement by any country could be considered.
Now, Zoe, I want to bring you in, if I can, because another Zoe, Zoe Daniel, has raised some issues in relation to our alliance with the US, and the America is very unpredictable at the moment. I don't think it's possible to dispute that, but whether we should be putting all our eggs in one basket. Does it worry you?
Well, you'd expect me, PK, as a Europhile, to say that, of course, we have a strong alliance with the US, but must equally maintain a strong alliance with Europe, in particular, the countries of Western Europe with which we've fought in wars past. And obviously, Europe in recent days has doubled down on its commitment to the Ukraine, and indeed, I think we should too. We were extremely strong at the beginning, sending bushmasters into that field of war, but equally, in receiving people from Ukraine who wanted to be here for a period of time to be safe and out of harm's way. And so I think we need to continue to do that.
But your leader doesn't want boots on the ground. I mean, if we could somehow even symbolically send people to be part of that unified coalition of the
We are
elite,
yet to see what that ground force will actually look like. I think it's been a big breach in the last week for Europe to say it would like to actually provide boots on the ground, but equally double down in terms of a financial investment. And I think we should be looking at what we can do to support. I wouldn't necessarily send boots on the ground because you don't want to move out of the Indo-Pacific, which is our main area of focus. But in terms of supporting Ukraine, I think we're on a united ticket.
Josh, are you worried about us having all of our eggs in the AUKUS basket, given the US is proving to be such an unpredictable partner and is clearly getting very close to Russia?
Well, look, I don't know that I'd characterise it as us having all of our eggs in one basket. You know, we've always prosecuted a balanced engagement with the world across all of the ways in which we do that: defence, development assistance, diplomacy, and trade. We've certainly made our engagement with the region, with the Pacific and the Indo-Pacific, a big focus of the work of the Albanese government, repairing some of the relationships there, making sure that we stay engaged across all of those four parts of the sort of the external affairs palette, if you like. Let me
cut through. I'd like to cut through talking points, and I will to Zoe as well, to be very fair. But I just want to ask you, are you concerned about the positions America is taking and our alliance?
Well, I honestly don't spend a lot of my time focusing on other countries' circumstances. So I don't spend a lot of my time focusing on circumstances in the United States. That's for their democratically elected
for the positions they're taking about the world and the democratic order.
Well, as you covered in your conversation with the Treasurer, we know that there are uncertain times around. That's been the case before the Trump administration was formed, but it continues with a delicate ceasefire in the Middle East and the war in Ukraine, and the kinds of trade measures that the Trump administration is considering. We have to navigate those as best we can. This is the government that resolved all of the trade impediments that existed between us and China, our largest trading partner, $20 billion worth of trade impediments, at the same time as we've gone and struck new trading relationships with other countries. We've got to keep doing that, being flexible and dynamic and looking after Australia's national interests.
OK, Zoe, you must be concerned about the positions, the closeness to Russia, the rhetoric we're hearing from the United States?
One of the things I should say, Josh has just talked about the deals that are supposedly been done. I'm struggling to remember many deals that have been done in terms of free trade by this government. The one that they haven't done, may I say, is with the EU, a market of 450 million people, for whom exchange in terms of people know-how, but especially minerals and stuff that is used in warfare.
Again, expertly avoiding my question. Just as I did with Josh, back to you on the position the US is taking, the closeness to Russia,
but I think we're yet to see where that's going to land.
Must be worrying you, though.
Well, I'm certainly watching it closely, but what I'm also mindful of, there's what Trump says on the national scene and then what unfolds sometimes later. I know he was particularly keen on getting a rare earths deal with Ukraine, and it looks overnight as though Zelensky may well be putting some cards on the table, even though he said he wasn't playing cards. He's making some overtures to the Trump administration to try and get that conversation back on deck, to make sure that the US remains a partner in defending Ukraine in that war.
OK, well, we've had to truncate our conversation because we have a cyclone that's hitting the East Coast. Neither of you are from that part of the world, but I appreciate your time this afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, Patricia.
Arrangements are hurting productivity, vowing to make public servants return to the office if they win the federal election. While arguing her case, the Shadow Finance Minister Jane Hume cited research that actually endorses hybrid work. Let's bring in National Senate Leader Bridget McKenzie to discuss this, but there's a lot more to talk about too. Bridget McKenzie, welcome.
Hey, PK.
Productivity Commission Chair Danielle Wood has said flexible working has boosted the workplace participation of women and its benefits shouldn't be ignored. She said women's full-time workforce participation had grown more in the past 2 years than in the previous 4 decades. Isn't that evidence that this kind of model works?
Well, obviously we want as many women who want to work to be in work in arrangements that suit them and their family. This isn't what the Coalition was talking about. The fact is that public service, we've got 60% of public servants working from home. And when you see the accounts that we've seen today, economically, we want to be lifting productivity, and that actually includes lifting the productivity of the public service. Now, you're not going to do that if you aren't in the office, collaborating with colleagues, meeting with stakeholders and ensuring that you're absolutely hitting those targets, and particularly if you're in those public-facing roles. So, PK, coppers, teachers, ABC presenters, senators don't get to work from home very often. We did in a pandemic. Those arrangements, which were for that period of our economy, are almost being normalised within the public service at the moment, and that's not a responsible way to run the taxpayers' dollars. We want people in work, increasing productivity.
Okay, but the studies are showing there are improvements from working from home, right? The evidence shows that actually this hybrid model does lead to productivity.
No, the research you quoted was it increased women's participation in the workforce. The public service, as I see them in estimates and as a former minister, is very, very welcoming of women. It's very, very welcoming of flexible work arrangements under the EBA agreements. That is not going to change. But what we have seen over time since COVID is those arrangements where people are working from home if their pets, for instance, are lonely. That is now commonplace within the public service, and we don't think that's appropriate. Public servants do great work. We want them doing their best work, and we want them in the office engaging productively with their colleagues and servicing the Australian public.
Look, Bridget McKenzie, the biggest story, of course, as it should be, is our focus on this cyclone. And the Treasurer, when I asked him about the budget impact, said to me their main focus is, of course, lives and dealing with people right now that need assistance. And no one would dispute that, right? But he also did confirm that it will have a significant impact on the budget. Do you accept that? I mean, that you need to just throw everything at this, given it's going to affect so many Australians potentially?
Look, I was the emergency services minister during the Lismore floods, and absolutely, when you are working with state colleagues in those roles, you need to have appropriate arrangements in place so that for the immediate aftermath and clean-up, we then have a long recovery, particularly in these type of events. So obviously the state Queensland government will be working very closely with the federal government as is appropriate. We want to make sure everything's in place as much as possible, people are as prepared as possible, but the cost of these type of disasters on both state and Commonwealth budgets does take its toll, and we won't know the impact obviously for many months to come as we see the toll on just not households but indeed on small businesses as well.
Just final question. The Shadow Treasurer, I should be clear, Angus Taylor, said that it wasn't your policy, the Coalition's policy, to have divestiture, if I can pronounce that correctly, powers to deal with insurers. Is that right? Is that the policy, that there is no divestiture powers for insurers?
Well, PK, we have divestiture powers, a policy for divestiture powers for supermarkets to break them up if they misuse their market power. What I think the Shadow Treasurer and indeed everyone within the Coalition wants to see is competition laws that are fit for purpose. We back the Australian people, we back small businesses in this country against large multinationals who abuse their market power. And we don't take a backward step from that. I saw the Treasurer trying to make a big song and dance about this, and I want to ask Jim Chalmers, whose team are you on, Jim? The big multinationals, or are you going to back small businesses and the Australian consumers against big business behaving badly?
But not insurers, just supermarkets, right?
For divestiture powers, we have a policy for that, but we will be announcing a very strong competition policy as part of the measures we take to the election that backs Australian consumers and small businesses against large multinationals behaving badly and misusing their market power.
Okay. Senator, thank you for joining us.
Always, PK.
Well, the timing of the election is now up in the air because of this tropical cyclone Alfred. Let's bring in one of our regular panels, former Labor advisor Ryan Liddell and former Liberal advisor David Gazard. Welcome to both of you.
G'day.
One comment today from Peter Dutton, who said the Prime Minister would have a tin ear if he were to announce an election over the weekend or Monday. David, is that right?
Look, we haven't had a cyclone go through a major centre since Darwin, which was catastrophic. It would be difficult to see how this wouldn't dominate the first parts of any election campaign. And we're now down to the point where the Prime Minister has squeezed himself into a position where this Monday would be the latest he could call a 33-day campaign without delivering a budget. And why is that important? Well, we know no budget is being prepared. So he could go for a longer campaign to push it out beyond Easter, but he would have to campaign for 6 or 7 weeks, which I don't think would help him. So it's a difficult position that Anthony Albanese finds himself in because he's dragged this thing out. But he has no preparations to do a budget. The Treasurer's been overseas, the Treasurer's been campaigning, and if you are preparing a budget, you are hard at work on the budget, not going overseas and campaigning.
Let me say that the Treasurer said something very different to us to fairly represent his view, which is that he has been preparing the budget. That's what he said. Ryan, I want to bring you in. What does this mean? Obviously, the main concern we have, I want to be super clear, is people's lives, people's property and this devastation, but it also upends politics, right?
Yeah, and I obviously don't want to make light of a very serious situation up in southeast Queensland, but doesn't it say everything about Australia that the timing of an election and whether a budget will be delivered or not can be determined by a natural disaster? Look, I don't think a final decision's been made yet. I think it'll obviously depend on the damage and the severity when Cyclone Alfred hits landfall. But I think it's fair to say that that the likelihood of an election being called, or an April election being called, is probably a little bit less likely than before. I'm quite interested in David having a much more of an insight into what the Treasurer's been up to than the Treasurer, Patricia. But I'll leave that to him. Well,
that's his view, but I just the Treasurer says he's working on his budget, so we'll see if he delivers it. David, something really interesting happened today, and I asked Bridget McKenzie, who just answered the question, and that's the Shadow Treasurer Angus Taylor basically, said that this policy to break up insurance companies is not a policy. It's not their policy. It's only supermarkets. That is different to what Peter Dutton said to Sky News several weeks ago. Is that worrying, this close to a potential election, to have the Shadow Treasurer and the leader not singing from the same policy song sheet?
I think it shows that this is a broader, and I noticed Senator McKenzie talking about this in the segment we just had before. This is where relations between the two major parties have got with big business. And you'll remember that the previous coalition government had what it called the big stick legislation that it could use over the banks, it could use over energy companies. So there is no love lost between big business and between at least the coalition that now sees itself far more in the role of the protector of the worker, and it has much closer affiliation to medium to small business. So whatever the case, whatever the policy, whether it's competition policy enforcement, whether it's big stick, whether it's divestiture, you can certainly get the sense that the coalition is going to be looking to back the consumer over multinationals.
OK, Ryan, the two different positions is obviously something that Labor has pointed out, as you expect them to, but very close to an election, it is different to what Peter Dutton said.
I think this is one of the things we'll start to see play out as the campaign sort of really takes hold, Patricia, and that is that, Peter Dutton's done a range of interviews saying we will win, setting expectations internally and externally that he will form government. Now, with that comes the electorate thinking, saying, well, OK, if you're so confident of winning, what are your plans? Which in turn puts pressure on the Liberal Party or the coalition to release policies. The more detail out there, the more scrutiny on the opposition and their policies, the more holes that can be poked in it by the government. And so I think having a huge a chasm of difference between the leader and the Treasurer on something as important as this is hugely significant, especially if they want, the keys to the lodge.
Well, we'll see who gets the keys to the lodge. We need an election campaign first, but obviously, as you'd hope, everyone's minds are actually on an impending disaster rather than, who's up or down in the polls and the ultimate poll. Thanks to both of you.
Thanks, PK.
Thanks, PK.
And that's it for Afternoon Briefing for today. Stay with us here on the ABC News channel. Joe O'Brien is up next with today's top stories. We're on iView. I'll see you tomorrow.